Hello, welcome to Derps Talk About Games. I'm your co-host, Mango.
And I am your co-host, Buddy.
And today we're going to talk a little bit about Tavern Keeper. But before we do that, buddy, why don't you let folks know what it is we do on this podcast?
Well, on this podcast, we talk about games. And in a rare turn of events that is not all that common for hey, would you look at this? We have a good friend. Hello, Orion. In a rare turn of events that is not all that common for our podcast, we get to talk about an original game that I designed. I designed a video game.
Ooh.
Yeah, there's a bunch of backstory that I will talk about a little bit when it comes to this. But yeah, so we're gonna talk about Tavern Keeper, which is a prototype, sort of what we're calling it. Sort of like a demo game that we made at the end of last year in the last 2 weeks of December. Uh and I did the design for it and the narrative for it, and it's on itch.io and Game Jolt. I'm sure in the description if you're listening to the podcast, and we could put up like a link or something if you're in chat um to the game. So yeah.
Yeah. So you mentioned that this is part of a hackathon. At least you mentioned it at one point. Do you want to talk about like the history behind this and like how it came to exist?
Yeah,
All that
so
goodness.
when we got into the holidays, it was like, people are always taking time off in the holidays. Our quarter four was very quiet. We didn't have any new releases or anything like that. We're just kind of like doing upkeep on a bunch of different titles, and so we floated the idea that we would host a game jam, which is sort of like a hackathon in that sense.
Yeah.
A game jam in a traditional sense is like at a convention, and you'll get like a weekend or something. You get like 2 days where you and a group of people get together and you just like
Yeah. Like
make a game
that
out
is
of
a
that.
hackathon, except not game exclusive. Also,
Yeah,
you
I
don't
guess
have all the
I've
said
actually never heard the
hackathons.
term hackathon. I'm just assuming. We actually sort of based this on. Do you know the Riot Games Thunderdome?
I'm not familiar with that. No.
I think that is a hackathon that they call a Thunderdome.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
Because that what they do is they like split people up into teams and they work on things, right? So for instance, in the LCS broadcasts, there's like a team fight view that you can go to. That was a result of the Thunderdome. I just
Okay.
remember I read like an article about this and I was like, "Oh, we should like do that," right? Um and I assume that a hackathon is sort of like the tech company version of
Yeah,
this.
basically, it's usually
Okay.
like web dev stuff, and like there's less artists and more UX designers, I guess, uh, or more program managers. But yeah, it's basically the same thing.
Yeah, so for us it was we thought of this as like a game jam, right?
Yeah.
In the final 2 weeks of the year, we kind of just said, not your whole shift, right? Like 15 hours. Spend that working on this game. We had a pitch like where everybody just submitted pitches, everybody voted on pitches, and then we kind of like broke up into teams based on those pitches. So my pitch was for Tavern Keeper, essentially. Though the pitch itself was actually a little bit different than what the final game. Hold on, I can actually like look this up really quickly. Was actually different than what the final game ended up being. My pitch said that it's an economic sim. You're a tavern keeper in a generic fantasy setting running a local tavern. As adventurers come through, they pay you for leads on nearby adventures like local bandits or goblins in a cave. To get those leads, you need to buy them off patrons, get them drunk enough to tell you or eavesdrop on their conversations. You get paid a percentage of the loot that comes when the adventurers come back, like a finder's fee. So you need to give the right leads to the right parties so that they have a higher chance of success. Party with a cleric will do better against undead, for instance. That was the pitch, which was like at the beginning of December, right? Then we actually started working on the game. Very quickly, that pitch changed a lot in order to sort of like meet the demands of like a 2 week,
Time.
15-hour
Yeah.
prototype. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
exactly. And we ended up with the Tavern Keeper that you can play today, that you have played,
Yes, I
that I've
have.
played also, but
Yeah. Yeah.
you
No,
specifically have also played and made
yeah.
a
Yeah.
high score.
Well, yeah, I beat the designated high score. I did not. I did not attempt to
Yeah,
push
correct.
for a high score because there's risk involved.
Do you want to know what the high score is right now?
What is it?
7,200.
Huh.
Somebody I don't know who that is. Somebody just in the emails pushed it to 7,200. I was like, holy crap.
So the thing I gotta know though and this is maybe a little bit too inside baseball to start out with, but I'm gonna ask it anyway. How
Sure.
much randomness is part of these? Like, are the outcomes deterministic, or can you get lucky? Because if you can get lucky, the upper end of those scores is gonna have a very thin tail. if that makes
You
sense.
can get lucky. It is random, and it is built to be like repeatable. So, for instance, something that I tried to avoid or that I didn't want to happen was to have the outcome be easily readable. In another version of this, I would want this to be more easily readable, but in a version where you're constantly churning quests, I don't want you to be able to detect how appropriate someone is for a mission based on one mission completion. It should actually be kind of an aggregate of a couple of them,
Sure.
right? So you might be sending someone on a great mission for them, but they will come back with a poor result. But like what you will see if you try it multiple times is in aggregate they will perform sort of better because the churn of the quests is so fast. It only takes a minute. They come back after a minute. Um, I felt like there's a lot of room for people to kind of like express that. It's a die roll, by the way, in the back end. It's essentially it's like a percent chance of this thing happening, and then depending on who you assign to what, you are affecting the mission parameters. So you're
Okay.
expanding the amount that you might critically succeed. You're lowering the amount that you might fail. That kind of thing.
Yeah, and and again, this is not a criticism. Just like some of like it's fairly opaque, right? Like, there's things like the Dragonborn that's like a religious person, right? Like it doesn't
Yes.
say. I don't think it says anywhere explicitly that he's good against the undead, but I made that assumption. And then in my
Hmm.
first game, he died a lot, and so like, or like he failed a lot and then he died, and so like I was like, maybe I'm wrong about that. And the other part of this too is that like there's like like this is probably just illusion, but I thought there might be like a general competence factor in there because like I thought the Dragonborn guy was just generally bad at everything, and the Gnome Hunter was generally good at everything.
There is not a general competence factor,
Huh.
actually.
Interesting.
It is all context. There actually I think there is. So you read the dialogue, right? Or was one of the dialogues not about him being good against undead?
So to be fair, I read it relatively quickly. And I
Sure.
was kind of like hunting for. So the only reason I questioned whether or not he was good against undead was because he seemed to be failing a lot of them. I was like, well, I guess he said he was holy, and maybe I just made that assumption. But I was also trying to read it quickly, right? Because you're on the clock, right? Like
Yeah.
if I had really wanted to dominate this, I would have taken out a notebook and then the first play, like so I kind of did this. My first playthrough was mostly like reading the dialogue and then I restarted. But if I really cared, I would have sat down with a notebook, right? Taken notes on all of them in the first playthrough, totally not cared about it, right? And then gone back and tried to churn as fast as possible. Also, maybe we've taken notes about the quest because they repeat to know no surprise. Like that's again not a criticism. I understand.
Yeah.
With,
I mean, there's only so much time. Well, so this was part of the original thing is we eventually settled on this sort of high score timed version of it, which like, imagine a world where Tavern Keeper gets like fully, like
mm,
it becomes a game. That would be stuff that I would want to take out immediately, basically, right? Because I don't think that it's actually like good for the game, but it's good for the prototype because it
right.
creates a real sort of like impetus to work the system. I also think that I would change a lot of the back end sort of stuff because a lot of that stuff works because you churn so much. But in a world where you wouldn't churn as much or as hard, I would probably be like, this needs to be like these numbers need to be different.
Yeah,
Like
yeah. If you're
really.
doing longer term stuff, you want it to be more short, right? Like you don't want to commit something
Yeah.
to 12 hours to have it miss because of a die roll, right? Like
Yeah,
so.
exactly.
For context, my initial take on it is this is like Command Desk, the standalone game, which you confirmed is like pretty similar. Command Desk being a feature from World of Warcraft, you send people out and on time skills like that. I think it needs to be a lot more deterministic than this.
Yeah, so interestingly, World of Warcraft is sort of the genesis of all this, but it's from a different piece. There's actually two quests in WoW where you serve as a quest giver, right? Where you get like a little exclamation mark over your head and people come up and give you quests. One of them is in Hillsbrad Foothills, the other one's in High Mountain. And I just sort of like thought about that like interaction when we were just like sitting down for these pitches and I was like thinking, oh, like what would I pitch? And I was just like, wouldn't it be interesting to create a game where it was about your skill as a quest giver rather than your skill as an adventurer?
Right. Yeah. There's a couple games that also play in this kind of general space. They're item shop games. It's like I think
Yeah.
Recettear is the biggest one.
Recettear was a huge one. Recettear, I told everybody immediately. I was like, this is like Recettear, but for quests instead of items.
Yeah. No, it's definitely a cool concept. Um, obvious like so if you had like let's say Akapara's like, buddy, this was really popular. We're gonna give you, $30 million to build this game in like 3 years. What would like the biggest version of this look like? Do you think?
I actually think it would look sort of like XCOM maybe. Um, I think the pie in the sky version of this actually has you managing the adventurers on their quests, like as
Okay.
a tactics game. Um, that said, I do think it's important that the characters are real characters, and that drives the number of them down in a way that you can't really do that with XCOM. Like in XCOM, you could just generate as many soldiers as you want, and certain of your soldiers kind of create emergent personalities outside of their gameplay, right? But for like the most part, right, like most of them don't really have that sort of thing.
Right.
I feel like 9 was a good number, and I'm glad that we hit that number. We were originally thinking 6, and I was like, I don't think this works at 6. I think you have to have 9 to give people enough room for like the churn and for the different sort of like quests and stuff to kind of work out. But anyway, but I would probably want to expand that number to like, I don't know, maybe double it, triple it, 18, 27. 27 seems like a lot. But it might be worth it, especially as like, the idea that like you're picking up more stuff over time. Because another thing is that like the high score stuff is mostly just because we scoped down really hard. Because
You're
it's
right.
just like you can't, in an ideal world, I'd want gold to be actual currency, right? That you are upgrading your bar or you are, like using it to accomplish whatever sorts of things you need to
Right.
accomplish, right? Um and and I think that that also sort of interacts with some of these things because that creates sort of like a progression system, right? If you have maybe you start with 9 adventurers and they all suck, and you can progress them out of suckage, right? But as you upgrade the bar, you can also attract new, better adventurers in, sort of thing. And maybe that'd be cool. Maybe that'd be interesting.
Mm.
I've always liked games like uh I was about to say Path of Exile, Pillars of Eternity, which are sort of like
The other
the
PoE.
you are managing a D&D game party,
Yeah.
right, games. But imagine that sort of thing where the party changes every time and you just sub in and out of like individual encounters rather than,
Sounds
anything
almost like
else.
Final Fantasy Tactics.
Yeah.
Or that kind of like, the tactics JRPG is kind of like its own genre,
Fire Emblem
subgenre.
is also
Yeah,
kind of
yeah.
like this. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Um, yeah, no, that's really cool because like that makes a lot of sense, right? Like that makes sense. It's like a way that this evolves out because just from the outside looking in, like the thing that it reminded me a lot of is kind of like a variant on those like the one that I played a lot of is like Cookie Clicker, but like those like hero clicker type games. It's not exactly that, but it's like in that same kind of like gestalt maybe, right? Like this could be like a mobile AFK game, in a
Yeah.
way
Yeah.
with a
I
little
mean,
bit more
I
skill in it.
I I think that's how it works in World of Warcraft, which is nice. But though one of the things that's interesting about WoW is that you can change the reward structure by quite a lot. This is like another I like the only thing the quest can give you is gold. The only thing they
Right,
cost is gold. And I can change the parameters, right? Certain quests require certain types of adventurers. Certain quests just have different kind of like back end numbers, right? Like there's one of them that has a very low investment, but it has a super hardcore payout if you can crit success it. But otherwise, it just sort of doesn't do anything, and it's sort of like a waste of your time in a way. So it's kind of like a jackpot quest compared to something that has a meager payout, but also like a risk of killing your guy. Like there's a lot of that kind of stuff in the back end on the quests, but there isn't a lot of stuff which is like player facing where like the quests are returning anything else than just sort of nebulously large amounts of gold to
yeah,
then fund for future quests.
yeah. No, I mean I was basically like because it's like so speed based because of the time component, right? Like, I was like barely like trying to absorb as much as I could in as little time as possible, right? So
Mm,
like even remembering who was on what quest was tough to do, kind of like juggling that all in my head. Usually just kind of fell out, and um I was like, okay, the like I sent Colbjorn on a quest with animals because he said talked about animals a lot, and so when he came back and he succeeded, it was an animal quest, and that's like about as good as tight of a of a filter as I could put on it, except for like, occasionally I would try and like remember individual things because I was trying to see if like, oh, this works or this doesn't. But it's
Yeah, that was one thing that when I was playing the final build last week, I was like, I wish I had, because I have a serious kind of moment as I'm sending somebody on a quest, right? Where I am like making an informed decision to assign them to that quest. But I want to see a better version of connecting the end state of that quest to sort of the first state of that quest, right? Because like a lot of the times I would get people who come back in and I could tell I mean, obviously, I wrote it, right? Like, I could tell the difference between the crit success, the failure, right? Obviously, the lethal failure, dialogues as they were coming back in. But it's like a minute after I put somebody out on a quest, I anticipated that I would be able to connect the dots. The truth is, I never made it. It's like I would put somebody out on a quest and be like, "Oh, they came back. That's great. What did I put them on? I don't quite remember." Sometimes I would, because like the decision making, I because like and this is where I think the game surprised me the most was how interesting the strategic decision making became towards who was going on what quests when I was making those sorts of decisions. As I had a good understanding of kind of what the quest sort of like looked like, and over time I got a good understanding of like, okay, the Tower of Crackling Doom. This is a spoiler, I guess. The Tower of Crackling Doom is a quest built for Gondor. He is great at that quest, right? Um, and I got into this weird position because you can only have 4 quests up at a time, right? Where it's like the Tower of Crackling Doom procs, but Gondor's not in the tavern. So, do I sit on it and wait for him to get there so I have the highest sort of like percent chance winner strategy on the Tower of Crackling Doom, or do I send it on somebody who is like not as good as Gondor, but still like serviceable, right? If you send any of the casters on Tower of Crackling Doom, they are going to do a good job because it is a caster mission. Um, and I think that that's like interesting. I don't really have a great answer for it, right? Like what I should be doing, how I should be churning through the different quests. Do I want to save these quests so I can get these kind of like slam dunk moments, or do I want to not save them and just kind of make compromise decisions all the time just in the interest of getting somebody out there?
yeah, I mean, part of that's a function of like chance too, right? Like it's like, well, who's next guy gonna be back in, and like how long am I gonna have to wait? Do I have to like do I need to like clear another slot, right? Like like am I just going, if I'm gonna sit here for like 30 seconds doing nothing, I probably need to throw someone in there, right? Like um yeah, no, it's interesting, kind of like the divergence points in the game too, right? Because like the first like 2 minutes of the game are a little bit slow because like you assign everybody and then you have to wait for something to come back in, and you're like running out of money. But like very
Hmm.
quickly past that, it's just like you're throwing things out as fast as you can, right? Like you have to make snap decisions. And that's also around the point where you kind of like, I think even on your first playthrough, you kind of like have seen most of what's there, so you can start like making those assignments without like thinking too hard about it, or
Yeah,
at
that's
least you
why I
know what you're
chose the
doing.
number 3,500, because I was like, I think most people will miss that their first time and get it the second.
Yeah,
You know what
no,
I mean? Like people will take the first time to learn the mechanics, read everybody's dialogues or whatever, get an understanding of the quests kind of at a glance. And then the second time, if they're making okay decisions, not maybe the best, the top level decisions, but okay decisions, they're probably going to hit 3,500.
mm. Well, that makes sense to me. It's I know it was like I was afraid of because you have to spend the money to get out there, right? Like I hit that 3,500 with like 4 minutes left. I just like put down, I was like I mean, took a screenshot. I'm done. Um,
Yeah, this is in the chat. Somebody just said shakes fists at the noob trap. Yes, that is the noob trap. In the last, all of the missions take a minute to go, right? And they take money to go out on, right?
yeah.
You're not gonna come back in. You're not gonna see that money come back. Which I, at the time, I remember we flagged it, and I was like, you know what, I'm fine with that, right? Like, I think it's okay for people to make decisions like that and then go, oh, I should have done this. I didn't think it through. That's like a strategic sort of decision, but it is sort of like a noob trap.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
So
And just for the folks at home, you actually paused for a second there, but if you send people out during the last minute, you won't see the returns. And I do think that's like a significant UX error because there's like no reason you do it. And honestly, my first playthrough, I did it just to see if it would like finish them out for me or not, right? Because like there's no way
Nope,
of
it
knowing.
does not do that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. But that's like an interesting problem to try and solve too, right? Like you just like because I think ideally the way you would do it, right? Like if I were like designing this from a usability standpoint, is at whatever time you want it to end, you just cut it off and you like instant end those missions and you do something to
Yeah, I
uh
think the real way to do it is to say that every mission on like minute 0, the timer ends, all of your missions complete no matter their duration, right?
right.
To just have people churning up all the way to like to the last second. Um yeah, it is I don't know. It's like a funny artifact of it being, like a game jam game. Cause like there was like stuff like that. I mean, that's what I mean about the strategic thing. I remember when we were talking about doing this like with the 4 quests and the 4 adventures in the tavern, I understood on a design level that that would create churn and that I would have to change the numbers. So I did that. But I really didn't anticipate the like do I wait with someone in the tavern? Do I try and save a person in the tavern for their best mission? Do I send all of those compromise choices I was talking about earlier? That's just like a true confluence of we had designed sort of 3 separate systems on top of each other, and I hadn't realized how they were all going to play out until I was in the build playing it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I think honestly, that's probably the most fruitful part of the game. Like when the game feels its best, it is in those moments where you are making those sorts of strategic decisions.
Huh. Yeah, no, that makes sense. I'm curious and just kind of pulling back the curtain is like how do characters respawn back into the tavern? Is that like on a timer or some?
I do think it's on the I actually don't remember. I don't think I specified this. So the other members of my team, I will shout them out here because I didn't earlier and I meant to and I forgot about it. So the other members of my team was Drew Montemayor on art, Chris Nguyen was our producer, right, like managing the whole project. Jaden Davis was the programmer, and Kyle Holmquist was the writer. He and I, well, there was a lot of writing. He and I split the writing basically. Um, and I think that was Jaden. I think I just like I hadn't specified anything, and Jaden just put the system in there, and he made the number, whatever that number is. So I don't actually know offhand because I'm pretty sure I just said that like when they end they'll come back, but we knew the tavern had a max of 4 people. I don't know.
No, no. So
Just
so
there
so
is a cooldown.
this is interesting because on the playthrough where I won, I posted a screenshot to the Akapar Discord and also to you. I had killed like 4 or 5 adventurers at that point. And I think they were spawning back in more consistently because there was only, like I don't think that I was actually penalized for them being dead in terms of like being able to churn them, right? So
Yeah,
like
that's correct.
yeah,
The
so
it's not supposed to be a penalty in terms of your capability of output. It's supposed to be a penalty in terms of your, when Gondor dies and you proc Tower of Crackling Doom, you no longer have the perfect guy for
right,
the perfect mission, sort of thing.
right, that
That's
makes
the
sense.
that's the penalty of lethal failures, as far as I'm concerned.
That makes sense. I mean, I felt it made it easier because I felt that the characters that I had left were ones that was more confident about what their abilities were. Like the charismatic tiefling, right? Like I wasn't quite sure what he was like, like stealth maybe and charm, but like there didn't seem to be a lot of charm missions. And like there was like one mission that was like if you could sneak up on the bear, you can stab him, right? Like, and that's like those were like the only things that I like matched him super well to, and otherwise it was just kind of like a dice roll, right? So it was like, and he died. So it was like, well, I'll just put Baron or not Baron, Colbjorn on that,
Bjorn?
yeah, because it's like it's an animal mission, him or the orc shaman, um, right? Because I felt like more confident about those. It was just like kind of an interesting way. I think the orc shaman died in that one. Um,
Yeah, so that's interesting. So I guess should I just like talk about the underlying mechanics here and just
well,
reveal them to the crowd?
is the
You're
contest
actually
still
pretty close, to be honest.
is the contest still ongoing?
I guess technically it is. I don't really know when we're gonna end the contest, so
I mean, like
but I don't feel bad
okay,
like letting people know. There are two traits on every character, and they are shared across all of the different characters, right? There is an advanced trait, which is sort of like their combat role, if you think about it that way. So stealth, for instance, on the illusionist, right? And then there's kind of a and then there's their basic trait, which is just like environment, right? So Kolbjorn, Kragan, the shaman, and Turb, the ranger, all share the hunter trait, which means they are good on wilderness missions, right? And then the illusionist, the Inquisitor, and Turb, the Ranger, all share the stealth trait. So they are good on stealth missions. And those affect things a little bit differently. I'm pretty sure advanced missions make you crit success more. Base or basic missions make you fail less, right?
okay.
Which is why you want to like the perfect match, like that Gondor match, it increases your crit success and lowers your stealth both at once. But if you send another caster, like Craig in the Shaman is also a caster, on Gondor's mission, he will still get the crit success bump. He just won't get the failure reduction. Does that make sense?
Interesting. Huh. And I assume
And
the
so
crit
it's
failure
just a
is death.
matrix of all of those.
I assume crit failure is death. Is like when.
So technically there is no you can't roll a critical failure. Certain failure conditions are lethal. On certain missions, if you fail, you will die, right?
Okay. Huh.
Um,
Interesting.
and then there are also a couple of there's actually a mission where if you succeed but don't crit succeed, you will die.
Huh. Very interesting. Huh. That is interesting to know.
You know, now that I broke it down, does that make it worse or better? Does that change your thought process at
I
all?
well, so I mean, it means that Turb is the ideal person for the bear mission, right?
Correct.
Like,
Yep. And
um,
technically, either Kragan or the uh the illusionist are okay for that mission, but it actually kind of makes sense that the illusionist died because he's only good at the stealth portion. He's not good at fighting
yeah,
the bear.
um, yeah, No, so the one thing I picked up on definitely was the cleric, the dwarven cleric, like hated the wilderness. Like he like I sent him on an undead mission in the wilderness, and he like came back and failed. I was like, well, he's only going to the city. It's like the city's the more important part.
Yeah, so that was a weird thing because I had originally sort of had the wilderness was easy, right?
Good.
And then I was like, I want to do undead, and I was like, I guess I'll just call those ruins. Is one category, and then the third category is like urban, right? Which is like bandits. It is like thieves or whatever. Like I think so. Sarathin, the Spellblade, is um the I can't remember the name of the trait is, but it's like the urban trait, and she is best at the mission, the Bandit Pit, where you just go and you just fight a million fucking bandits,
Oh,
because like of the
huh.
confluence of those two things.
See, I had that totally off since it was like a pit. I thought that was like an outdoor thing, and so I would send Colbjorn regularly to that because he's like, I like to fight, I like being outdoors. So
Yeah, I mean Corbjorn is good at that one,
yeah,
but his is the Den of Spiders, I think, where you just gotta fight a million
okay,
spiders.
yeah, no, that makes sense. That makes sense. Yeah, you know the spell.
It, Sor-
Go on.
Sarathin I actually really like because she is also so there's the Paladin Kishra and Sarathin the Spellblade, but they both have dialogue that says I'm a spellcaster, but I'm not that good a spellcaster. Like, don't send me on caster missions, right? Which I kind of included as like a red herring a little bit because I did the dialogue for 5 of the characters. Kyle did it for the other 4. Kishra and Sarathin were both my characters, and I remember, two of the dialogue provide you negative information, right? What am I bad at? Two of the dialogue provide you positive information. I'm good at these things, right? Um, and so I specifically included for Kishra and Sarathin that they are not they are competent spellcasters for the purposes of combat, but they are not competent spellcasters for the purposes of like solving problems with magic, which is what that bottom row, Kragan, Grimgi, Gondor, those are all like they have the caster trait.
Okay, interesting. See, I didn't pick up on that, right? Like I thought like I like so I didn't pick up on a kind of like the caster kind of trait part of it, right?
Mm.
Like Sir Rathrin or the spellblade is like it's a haughty elf that thinks she's good at everything. So go, and I actually thought she was rolling into the kind of like generally competent kind of thing that I thought was going on. So I was like, I'll just throw her at anything, whatever. And then uh but I did pick up on that for the cat paladin, um but
Kishra, yeah.
Kishra,
I
but
also want to note that we have in the chat, and if you don't read any of the dialogue, then you just guess. You know what? That's fair.
I mean that's kind of like you have to do a fair amount of guesswork anyway, but it makes sense, right? Like because the dragon priest, like I mentioned this, because the dragon priest was just religious, I kind of assumed it was undead. There's a whole. It's weird what you think happens because of like the die rolls, right? Like so, like I said, I thought there was this competence thing. I thought that maybe he wasn't like he was just kind of like a schlub because he was also kind of like obnoxious in the bar. He's like
I actually kind of had the idea for a competence thing, which is that like as they complete mission, they essentially get experience over
experience, yeah,
time and just increase their it was like they decrease their failure rate by 1%, increase their crit success by 1%. So if you think about it, there's crit success on the top, there's failure on the bottom, and then in the middle is success, and you're just slowly I'm sorry, you're slowly pushing that down so that you're having more opportunities to crit. But the thing is I really wanted critical success is to be the marker that you have done something smart with this character, right? Because it is something that's different. It has like its own sort of like it has its own particular dialogue thing. Um, I think in general it's tough. I was we threw out the idea initially of just labeling the traits because then it's just a mix and match thing, right? You have to make it a little bit opaque in order to
yeah,
like create the tension of I'm not quite sure this is the
yeah,
right
yeah.
idea. Um, but it is like interesting because like it's just reading comprehension at that point. It's like a reading comprehension game.
Yeah, no, and there's some. I think there's some like I never put together that the tower was a Gondor thing, right? Like I like
Mm.
um because like Gondor, I wasn't sure what I was supposed to do with him because he like it's one and one of the lines he explicitly says I'm not good at combat, like I don't like fighting, and it's like, well, what do I send him on then, right? Like because like in my mind every mission's like a combat mission at some level, right? Uh
Oh, interesting. Okay.
yeah,
I
because
that was the thing that I added to. There's three of them. There's like the Orphan's Graveyard, which is Kragan's mission. There's the Revenant's Puzzle, which is Grimkey's mission, and then there's the Tower of Crackling Doom. And all of those, I was trying to like create this feeling of like you need you need like an arcane caster to like disable the runes on this thing.
okay.
That's how you defeat you do the mission. It's not like a combat thing. It's just a like think about it and cast the right. If you cast Mage Hand on this thing, it'll I don't know, it'll work, I guess. Um, because
Huh.
really only a certain number of those missions were like true. I mean, there's a difference between like combat and stealth to a certain extent, even though they both involve a certain amount of like combat actually, which I think makes that a little bit confusing. Like the bear mission is a stealth mission, not a combat mission, even though presumably it means fighting a bear.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Yeah. No, that makes yeah. Yeah, there was the Remnants puzzle was is that the one with like the ghost bard?
I think so.
Okay.
I kind of honestly, I
Yeah,
wrote
yeah.
I wrote a bunch of these. It was like 3 a.m.
No, no, I
Yeah.
get it. I get it. No, it's super interesting to break it down too, just because like I was like like just like because that had a bard in it. Sometimes they would assign the illusionist or like the tiefling to it because bard is charmy, right,
He
charismatic.
was very bad at that mission.
Yeah, no, I think yeah.
Yeah, that was another thing. I wasn't sure if that would track, and I don't think it did. Part of it is that I actually think I should have labeled them with clear classes. I was like using the words in the dialogue, but I feel like if it had said, Gondor slash sorcerer under his portrait every time or whatever, it'd be easier to sort of pick up on those things. Because I think illusionist reads like caster, but if you think about it, it actually helped. It's like, oh, this is a stealth guy because he can, turn invisible, he can make illusions or whatever. And the way that he's talking about the missions that he's good at, he's like
See,
proficient at.
I never even picked
Before.
up that he was like a caster. Like I thought he like, and maybe I was just reading too fast, but I was just like, oh, he's a rogue, and he's like a rogue, but he's like a smarmy rogue, right? So like and that means stealth and charisma in that sense. Like okay,
Well,
categorize the
so he's
next.
technically not a caster. He doesn't have the caster trait. He has the shit. Or whatever the urban trait is called, which is like magic.
Sure.
Also, I want to note that in the chat, our good friend Don PhD says, "But if you send everyone on a caravan mission, they just die. So what good are they actually even good at?" Well, the thing about the caravan mission is, I'm pretty sure it's bugged. The caravan mission, I'm pretty sure, has like a 35% failure rate, but it's not supposed to be lethal. But I think it is lethal in the game build. So if you send people on a caravan mission, they just die all the time, which is not intended behavior.
Because
Yeah,
it's,
so the
it's also one
caravan is
that
a trap.
because the caravan one's also like this is easy. Go,
Yeah, that's the other thing. The caravan mission is specifically the jackpot mission, right? It has a high failure rate, and if you succeed on it, I think you just make your investment back, or maybe and it's cheap to go on, right? It's like 20 gold to
yeah,
send out, 10 gold to come in, sort of thing. But if you crit success, you get like 500 gold. It is a Hail Mary jackpot trying to get. It has no other traits. Nobody is any more suited at the caravan mission than anybody else. Um, because there's a handful of those that are just sort of like anybody can do these,
right.
you know, to fill the quest log or whatever. But yeah, so 35% of the time it it kills you. Watch out for the caravan mission.
Oh Jesus.
I mean, I actually haven't told anybody that. I should highlight that so that we could make an updated build. Because like death is supposed to be a thing, but it is supposed to be like rarer. What the biggest danger that I think is in the game as it stands is sending somebody who is not suited for a mission on the traded missions. I don't think there's a death clause in any of the generic ones.
Oh, you know
But
what? This is why I thought the dragon guy was incompetent because I would send him on the caravan mission and he'd die. He'd be like, "This is an easy mission."
yeah, like those the generic missions are there to sort of fill it out so that you're not just constantly working with traits. And if you have somebody and you're not procking a good mission for them, you can send them on something that is not that, right? So like the goblins are like this or whatever. It's just like it's just a bunch of fucking cops. Go kill
Yeah.
them, kind of thing. Um, it doesn't really have any more parameters than that. But yeah, so that's rough when it comes to the caravan mission. The worst part about the caravan mission is that it's only 20 gold too. So it's very common that you will be spending down and then you'll have like 80 gold left and all of your quests will be grayed out except for the caravan mission. So the game, like, you're like, well, it's the only quest left. I better send somebody on it, and then they fucking die.
Oh, it's amazing. Oh man. So just in terms of like things that I would highlight that I didn't think were messaged so well. Like it took me till like halfway through my second game to figure out that there was like a critical success modifier. Just because like I was because I'm going for a score, like I'm just turning fast, and because it's not in the instruction panel, it took me a little while to kind of like observe that, especially because when the prompts come in, right? Like the incoming prompts are mostly kind of like their time spent trying to read, and so I'm mostly just like looking at the gold to see how much like if it went up or not, and then I just like click through and don't even like
Interesting, yeah.
read the dialogue. And this is all like a casualty of kind of like the needing to go faster, right? Needing to press more. I need to press more buttons, buddy. Um,
No, I actually get that quite a lot. I like the idea of there being critical success dialogue, especially because the generic success dialogue is pretty basic, but the critical success dialogue is more flavorful because it's rarer, obviously, and it is a truer expression of these characters, right? Like,
sure.
kind of going above and beyond, which felt, which felt good or whatever. But yeah, I do agree with you. Because crit, like they are supposed to be rare, especially if you're not gunning for them, right? Like once you start assigning the right people the right missions, you're going to be seeing critical successes more often, obviously.
Right.
But until that point, it is I don't know, it's tougher.
Yeah. No, it's yeah. No, but it's I don't know. You said it took you 15 hours. You had 15 hours to work on it.
Yeah, so I had 15 hours to the whole team each individually had 15 hours. So I
Okay.
had my 15 hours and then they had their 15 hours. And the interesting thing is actually that like I wrote about this in the blog on the Aquapar Games website, which ended up being like a lot. I went really hard on that blog, you guys. Because in its original conception, I actually didn't type out a lot of this stuff. Like I had that stuff about traits and the adventures and stuff in my head, but at first I just wanted to kind of like create a working prototype. But this actually became pretty problematic for the team because they didn't have a good sense of sort of like the long-term goal. So I was making a decision about scope, right? Like I was trying to keep us contained and not scoping out of control
Right.
immediately, right? But then I had a conversation with Chris, who's the producer, and he was like, "Listen, it is not your job to worry about scope. Like you are the designer. You need to design the whole game and show everyone kind of, where we're going. Let me worry about scope. If something is out of scope, I am the one who's going to make that kind of determination, right?" Um,
Interesting.
and so, yeah, and that was huge, and that was a huge deal. That like, I think that conversation is like the crucial conversation that like really opened up kind of like the whole thing because then I immediately turned this conversation was on a Friday and we had a meeting on Monday where everybody was going to get together. We were going to talk about whatever. We had our prototype build. The prototype build did have functionality, but it was just insanely. It was like super basic. The adventurers didn't have any. There were no traits. There weren't even character names at that point, right? And so I spent that weekend and I put a bunch of time and I really laid out the full design document, like with all of this stuff that I was like thinking about of like, okay, 9 classes, here's the matrix, here's basic traits, advanced traits, here's the different quests that I envision for each of these characters, right? Like all of this other stuff that and then like I said, we were gonna have six. At first we were like, we have to scope it to six, but then Drew, our artist, was like, actually, I think we can do more than that if I just don't do because the big bottleneck is always art. So because it'll take me a number of amount of time to like write the quest dialogue, all this other stuff, right? But at the end of the day, the amount of time it will take Drew to draw these characters, right, and like color them, put art to them. Um, that's the thing that's going to stop us from adding as many characters as we want to this thing. And he was like, I can make a generic sort of like cloaked adventurer just to put in the basic screen, but then we can give each of them an individual portrait. So you can see their face, but you won't see like the rest of their body or whatever, which was also a very crucial decision. Because like I said, I think the game would really suck and would not work as well with six. But I think nine is kind of the perfect number, at least for this like
Slice. Yeah.
basic, yeah, on
Huh.
without any sort of progression. I think nine is the perfect number.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. Huh. Yeah. No. It's interesting.
Did you enjoy the art of any of the individual characters?
I thought it was great for like a game jam style thing, right? Like so I am used to, like I said, hackathon type stuff where all art is programmer art, if you even have like art. So right, where it's like something where you're pulling off a shelf for like a like web dev doesn't have all the same art kind of requirements. And like
Sure.
I have done games at hackathons because I'm like that weird guy who likes games. And there's always a couple people like that who's like, oh boy, we're the people that like enjoy game stuff but went into something more practical instead of game stuff. So like you always
Mm,
pull a couple people, but then like the art's always just kind of like stock stuff you pull off of like the Unity store or something. So I was very impressed, but I also don't live in the games world really. So um,
yeah,
yeah, but
I
yeah,
was also very impressed. I think part of it is that one of the funny things is that the Tavern Keeper character, I had in my head this backstory of like you're an adventurer who goes out and is doing these quests or whatever, but you come back with a ton of gold. What do you spend that gold on? You retire, you buy a tavern, and you're now sort of like retired. And I remember I was thinking about like these, I don't, you can't even really see them, but like these things, I think of that as like a mark of kind of like stress and
these things
pronounced lines here. Do you see the lines I'm pointing to on
what,
my
what
face?
like you're like, oh, like under your under your
They're
nose to
called
like
yeah, they're called smile lines. For everybody on the podcast,
uh,
you cannot see this, and I'm sorry. It is like the line that goes from the edges of your nostrils down to the
corners
edges of
of your
your
mouth.
like the
Yeah,
corners of your mouth. Yeah.
yeah.
And when those are really pronounced, that to me is a physical feature that like says this is someone who's like been around the block, right? Like grandmas have really pronounced smile lines is what they're called. And I told that to Drew. I was like, I'm really looking for smile lines. I want deep pronounced smile lines. And he absolutely like just hit it. It was like done in one, right? Like kind of getting that character aesthetic just like immediately down. And then even each of the individual characters too. Like for instance, Sorathin, the Spellblade, who I is based is as a gender flipped version of a WoW character that I have. Um and but like basically I had a very basic archetype for what she was like. And then I saw the art and I was like, "Oh, I'm going to lean into this really hard." And that's when I wrote all of like the super kind of I mean, it's like haughty elf trope
Yeah,
stuff, but
yeah,
I just thought it was funny. Like
yeah.
there's one line where she's like very bitter about losing a fight to Kolbjorn. That was maybe my favorite line in the whole thing.
Uh, yeah, I remember. It's like I can't fight a bear, right? Like or something like that.
It's like I didn't lose. I simply failed to win. And also, it's fucking cheating that he turned into a bear and I have a rapier. It's like I don't know. I just thought that was funny. I also really enjoyed putting Kolbjorn in the game, even though he was technically a druid and not a brawler. He's very different. He's different in power to the Kolbjorn of our Iron Gods days, but I feel like he is very similar in disposition
Yeah, yeah. No,
of
I
just
definitely
like
got that.
wanting a good tussle.
Definitely got that. All right. So you said that you each spent 15 hours. So my experience with hackathon type things is no matter how you format it, right? It's like everybody's in a room together for the 15 hours together. And so even though you say it's like you know hours times number of members, person hours of time. It sounds like you were doing that. Were you doing it in sequence, or were you all working together at the same time?
It was all remote and it was over the course of 2 weeks, right? Like I was still doing my actual
Right.
job. It's just 15 hours of my job could be budgeted inside of these 2 weeks to Tavern Keeper.
Okay.
Um, I mean, if I'm being really honest, I probably spent more than 15 hours. I was very strict with myself on time because they gave us the time limit, and I was like, I should be good about this time. But like I said, man, like when I was writing the quest text, which was no, I'm sorry, not the quest text. The very final thing I did was write the crit success, like success failure texts on the bottom of everybody's like sheets or whatever. Um, because I realized we had said that we were going to do that and then nobody had done it. It was the day before it was done. And the day before it needed to be done. And I was up at like 2 a.m., which is normal for me in a certain sense because of how I work. Like I typically work like 5 or 6 hours in the beginning of the day and then do stuff like this, the podcast, right? Or like play WoW with my friends or something like that. And then at the end of my night at like 11 p.m., I go back and I work for however many hours. And so I was there, and so I was like there at 2 a.m. and I was like writing these, and I was writing them super kind of quickly and off the cuff. And I felt a little dirty too because like so only five of the characters were mine: Sarath and Kishra, Gondar, Grimgi, and Kolbjorn were characters that I made. The other four were from Kyle, and I felt really dirty because I was like putting words in Kyle's characters' mouths, even though I really like Kyle's characters and I think that they were great. And I like knew Kyle's characters because uh, I made I wanted to create a diversified group so that there weren't people who were sort of like stepping on one another's toes in terms of sort of like personality, right?
Right.
So I tried to avoid, Kolbjorn is like bolsterous and fun rather than sort of like quiet and taciturn because Kragan was already sort of like
Yeah.
quiet and taciturn, right? That kind of thing. Um, so yeah, so that's how it was working. It was just like when people got to stuff, and we were just like showing off whatever. Like Drew actually finished first, like the art guy. He because art is so demanding, and so he basically was complete on the project maybe a week before it was over. And was no, that's not quite true. A couple of days though, just because
Yeah.
basically immediately.
Huh. So so this is an interesting thing, and this is a little bit outside of kind of like the specifics of Tavern Keeper, but um
Sure.
so I've like I said I've done a couple different hackathons, and I've done and like I've heard this about other things. It's like this is kind of like a thing, at least in industry, is that things that are independent, right, are generally kind of are fine or whatever, like you're doing it for fun or whatever. But um, something that sometimes the criticism that gets levied at, especially at like these tech company hackathons, is that it's essentially a way to like pull more labor out of people and like by putting in the frame of a context to encourage them to work outside of normal working hours, and it's kind of like taking their time. And part of this is that I think it's less common with game jams because games works on a very different plane, especially the type of people that go to game, like the type of companies that participate in game jams, right? But like when these features get turned into real product, like that's built on like with essentially like voluntary but not really extra time, right? Like like something like a game you're working on is obviously something you enjoy, right? Like or
Mhm.
hopefully, right? So like there's not as many of those concerned there, but I know that like it's like, well, we stayed up all night doing this thing that might turn into a real product, and our compensation is kudos at the end of the day, right? So like it's just an interesting kind of
See,
spin on
I
it.
mean, I get that, obviously. I don't know if I like. So obviously, all this stuff is owned. I was
Yeah.
paid by Akupara to
Right.
participate in this and develop this for them, right? Like obviously, like they own all of it. But to me, that's a benefit. That's a
Right.
feature,
Right.
not a bug, right? Like I think this is just the nature of being a games publisher and also developer inside of like this world. Like there are so many people who are vying for our attention to put our eyes on their game. That the game jam, like let's say this isn't happening, obviously. Um, but let's say pie in the sky, like we were talking about earlier, uh, Tavern Keeper does become a real thing. I sort of took like this is like the fast lane. You know what
Right.
I mean?
Yeah.
To getting a game like funded, developed, and published compared to something where I was doing Tavern Keeper on my own time and then trying to get it in consideration
Right.
alongside
Right.
all of these other games that we're working on, right? Like, look, Tavern Keeper, this prototype is great, but imagine showing this prototype next to Grimes prototype
Right.
and being like,
Right.
we should fucking publish Tavern Keeper, right? Like, I don't know. So I guess I get that. I mean, obviously, I think the way that we went about this was like the right way to go about it, right? Like
Right.
it
Sure.
gave everybody a lot of time, and it was really nice to have that time because it meant that we could kind of like iterate over a couple of days, and it wasn't like we were all you know if I needed to spend a night thinking about something and coming back to it, I could. Or if I wanted to respond to Drew's art and change the way that I was writing the character dialogue, I could also do that. Um, which I liked a lot, and I was happy like we had that sort of opportunity. So yeah, I don't know. I
Yeah.
mean, like I said, I don't really know anything about hackathons, so
I bet you part of this too is like anybody who's working at a games publisher likes games, right? Like
yeah,
there are a fair number of people I know, and I don't think there's anything wrong with this, that were going to the places like going to places that I worked to take home a paycheck, right? And like and
yeah.
and so telling them that that they needed to stay on. Also, I think you know at least like normal tech tends to skew slightly older. Like telling them that they needed to stay a night, late into the night, and like not see their children that night. And it was voluntary, but like be a team player type of things.
Mm,
And, I think there's a little bit more in the mix there. To the credit of the places that they paid us for it, right? Like or rather they they offered prizes. They offered like a real money prize, right? So like I got like we I at my first company, the first time we did two of them, the first time we did it, we made a silly game, and we didn't win anything. But the second time we made some sort of like AI like based response um to like a message thing. It was very basic, but it was. I mean, we won a prize for it, so I got like a couple extra bucks on my paycheck for it. And so I think that kind of like dulls the pain there, but it's
yeah, I
it
think I would actually. I think I actually prefer the way that we did it.
yeah.
Just adding it to my like regular hour. Like you know, we worked really hard on Tavern Keep, and I'm super proud. Oh my God! Hello, King Fat in the chat. I love you guys, buddy and Mango. You guys are the best. Thank you. I appreciate that. So I don't know who this is, but that makes my day. Um, But so like obviously Tavern Keeper is maybe the best that you can come out with in terms of like game jam stuff, right? Like we pretty clearly set scope on that second meeting after the first, like after the
Right.
first Friday meeting that next Monday, we set our scope and we hit that scope right on bullseye and
Right.
came out with a product, like something that is really solid. It's really easy for other game jams to go over and under scope. This is something we heard all the time when we were talking about like, oh, we're doing it to game jam at the end of December, and I was talking to like other people we were working with. They were saying like, oh man, game jams always scope out of control and they become a huge mess because of it, which is why I was so conservative at first, right?
Mm.
Or the opposite is also true, right? Where you kind of scope something out and then it seems like solid, but it doesn't actually really materialize once you're done, but you don't have any time to iterate or fix on it. You basically just sort of had the doc and it took enough time to create the prototype and the prototype is a dud. That can also happen in game jams or whatever. And I'm very glad that didn't happen in Tavern Keeper. And in a certain sense, I actually think it didn't happen in Tavern Keeper because of that strategy interaction of the limited number of quests, the limited number of adventurers thing, right? Like maybe if some of those rules were different, like if I had put in different rules than there, that interaction, which I think is really the core of Tavern Keeper, would have created a very just I don't know underwhelming.
Yeah, I also wonder how much of this is due to kind of like your format, which is kind of like 15 hours spread out over 2 weeks, right?
Yeah,
Whereas like most game jams are like 48 hours. If,
inside of a gymnasium.
yeah, 48 hours in 48 hours go, right? Like you can do things in stages, right? Like you can like
Yeah.
do the design document and pass it off without like burning time, right? Like
Mhm.
the programmer can take their 15 hours after they know what they need to do instead of trying to do something concurrently, right? And um
Yeah, and nobody did anything until I wrote out the first draft of the design document, and then we built our first build, which was that Friday, right? So it started on Monday. I wrote the design document Monday and Tuesday. We made the first prototype. We had all the first passes on the basic like UI, like that basic tavern window, the tavern keeper figure herself. The next Monday we did character profiles, which were done by Tuesday, I'm pretty sure. And then all of our writing was just like the rest of the week. Though like the quests and everything, like that was all done pretty much right off the bat. Um, though I ended up tweaking it on the second pass because that's when we added traits and everything like that. Yeah. Game jams are wild. This was
yeah.
it was honestly a lot of fun. It was like the greatest thing. And I I I don't know.
No, it's I mean it sounds like it. It
The,
sounds it's I mean the I the product that I played was awesome. Are you guys putting out like did you guys have multiple teams working on this, or is there
Yep,
more
so we
coming?
had 3 total games. The next one comes out in 3 days on Thursday. So ours came out last Thursday. The next one comes out this Thursday. The last one comes out the final Thursday in January. And all 3 of them like Tavern Keeper will be absolutely free on itch.io and Game Jolt under their own, pages. So, you can download them, play them. There's going to be blogs from the design. Like I wasn't on either of those teams. Obviously, I was
Right.
only on Tavern Keeper. Certain people bled between teams. Kyle was on 2 teams, which is why I picked up half of the, like the writing on Tavern Keeper because he was spread between 2 groups. And yeah, so I don't want to reveal anything about the next ones, but the next ones are very cool. Actually, the third one is really cool and like stupid, but like also great in like a great way. And I'll probably plug those in the end of those podcasts, so
Yeah,
you
well,
guys
I'm
can.
looking at checking them out. So it's definitely a lot of fun to play Tavern Keeper. So yeah,
Yeah, you played a game that I designed, Manga.
yeah,
That feels so weird to say.
yeah. Hey, you know,
I'd never expected people to buy into this idea, to be honest. But what are you gonna do?
well, we're at about an hour. How was your week? How's your week been?
I want you to guess what I've been playing all week.
Is it?
Tavern Keeper. No,
Uh,
it's WoW.
yeah, I would say, is it Final Fantasy 14? Is it Guild
Yeah,
Wars
yeah.
2?
I finally made the jump to Final Fantasy 14 after years. I've made that jump. Yeah, so I've been playing World of Warcraft. I went really hard on my mythics chest this week, which I feel really like good about. I've completed my very first 10. So I've cracked the final affix. Do you know how this stuff works?
I remember vaguely, but why don't you explain it for the audience at
Okay,
least?
okay. For the audience at home, right? This is how Mythic Plus works, right? You complete a Mythic 0, right? Dungeons have just a scaling number of difficulties: normal, heroic, mythic. Once you complete a Mythic 0, you get a key. The key says it has a number and it has a dungeon, and you go to that dungeon and you plug in the key, and it activates Mythic Plus. This is what Mythic Plus is, right? Mythic Plus scales the damage of the enemies inside of that dungeon based on the key size, right? So a +2 will scale them by a certain amount. A +3 will be more. +4 will be more. +5 will be more, right? All the way up until you're fighting essentially raid bosses as a 5-man group, right? Um, but as you attain those key levels, you're also attaining what are called affixes that change the makeup of the individual dungeons, right? So this week, for instance, once you hit +2, the very first level of keys, um, you activate Tyrannical, which says all of the bosses do more damage and have more health, right? It makes the bosses hard and it essentially keeps the trash mostly the same, right? At 4, you activate Raging, which says the trash, when it gets low, it enrages itself and it deals 100% more damage from 30% to 0, right? So if you're whittling down a whole trash pack together and they all proc 30%, well, all of a sudden they're doing twice as much damage as they used to. That's what raging says. At 7, you proc explosive. Explosive generates these little orbs, and the orbs have like 1 hit point. They actually technically have like 150, but that's essentially 1 hit from anything in any class in the game. um if you don't destroy the orb, it blows up and it deals like a lot of damage, like 50% of everyone's health damage. And they spawn next to anybody engaged in combat, right? So if you like tag a guy and he's 50 feet away, he will spawn explosive orbs next to himself 50 feet away, and somebody has to go hit that orb. And then finally at 10 is what's called the season wide affix, which is just a specific affix for like the season that is the capstone of sort of like difficulty in terms of the affixes, which is called prideful, which basically says once you kill enough trash, you'll spawn a big boy. The big boy will fight you, and then you kill him, and then he gives you a buff for a minute. That's 40% damage, 40% healing, 40% move speed for like a minute. So prideful is all about killing the right amounts of trash to spawn a prideful and take that prideful to the boss, or take that prideful to a really tough trash pack, or take that prideful wherever you think taking that prideful is useful. um we had we had attempted one dungeon, but we very clearly were like, this is way out of our league. No way we're gonna get this done. And then this week we did a very kind of true push, which felt great. We went from, actually it wasn't a true push. It was we did a 7 and we failed it, so it dropped down to a 6. But then we did the 6 and we two chest it, so it went up to an 8, and then we did 8, 9, 10 all the way up. And that was cool. So this is like sort of the first time that I've like had that ability to sort of like walk the keys up in terms of difficulty, in terms of like coping with the new affixes, right? Like the difference between a 6 and a 7 was pretty huge, because the thing that was really fucking us over were the explosive orbs that kept spawning, because of certain boss interactions that we hadn't anticipated, which was rough. uh, so yeah, I don't know, that was my week.
Hmm? No, very very cool. I'm gonna say that I just did two mythics to do the weeklies, like the broker weeklies.
Hmm.
I have the day off today because it is Martin Luther King Jr. Day here in the good old U.S. of A. Um, and it was my first time like really do like I had done some a mythic 0 and a mythic 2 I think before, but like that had been it. Um, and it's like, I, because it's relatively, it's more than 3 weeks after the season has started, so no one has any tolerance for like not knowing what you're doing. And I didn't know some of what I was doing, so I like kept screwing up things in the other side. But uh in Plaguefall, it was the key holder actually who was screwing, like, the Margrave just like fucked him up real bad, and like we kept. Well, I mean, it was interesting to kind of play around with these things.
I
Although
really like that Margrave fight, because the difficulty ramp up from normal to mythic is almost entirely in the patterns of tentacles. Like, they have just harder tentacle
Mm.
patterns in Mythic, which I think is a really cool, like, sort of difficulty things. It's, like, very easy to dodge the tentacles, you get a lot of time in normal, and then they kind of, like, shorten the time, and then they make those really tough patterns in Mythic that it's like, I don't know, it's just, like,
Yeah.
an interesting interaction.
The thing that threw me off the most was the extra ads that spawn.
Oh,
Um,
yeah.
because like it's not in the journal, and so I'm like, oh, am I supposed to like DBM isn't telling me to kill them, and so like am I supposed to ignore them? And it's like maybe that's me being a little bit too reliant on DBM, but it's like I don't know what I'm supposed to do with this. I'm just
I
gonna
actually think those sorts of things are so I've been doing a lot of Mythics over the course of the expansion so far, so I have, like, a lot of deep mastery of like certain dungeons, like Theater of Pain. Man, I am a monster at Theater of Pain. I could tell you every pull, like individually what you have to do, like all of the little nuances of that dungeon or whatever. And I think that that's actually one of the cool things is that, like, when you do Mythic Zero, a lot of times you're just brute forcing these mechanics, and so you don't really like see them or contend with them. But like those guys that spawn, you actually kind of have to blitz them down in when we were doing Plaguefall in 7 because they spawn explosive orbs. And so it's like if you leave them up, they're just going to keep spawning orbs, and it's going to be tough to deal with. And one of those goes off, right? Like that's really dangerous in the boss fight. And it's like those kinds of things that I don't know that become interesting and like fun, I guess, about mythics. And it also separates. Like I have friends who are like good raiders, I would say, for instance, but I don't think that they're like good high level mythics players. And it's because they don't know the dungeons as well as like the specific nuances of like the fights as well as I do, or like the other people that I run a lot with do. And so like, they'll be having trouble with like a 7 key that we've like knocked out of the park. And one of the funny things is actually Plaguefall is one of our worst dungeons because we never do it. We're always gravitating towards these dungeons that we know really well, like Theater of Pain. Um but so we've been like, we have to do Necrotic Wake, we have to do Plaguefall to get that mastery of these dungeons down because like we just don't have it yet.
huh,
What were
fair.
you screwing up in the other side? I'm actually interested.
It was actually nothing until the final boss. Like I was actually pretty good. Like you told me about that button, so I pressed the button as an engineer, and I used the vases pretty well. I felt good about that. Uh, but
What?
in the final fight, people like were calling out like directions. And I was like, what are they talking about? And then I realized that I was just like not dropping the ball from like the big like the boss like hits you with like Muzala hits you with the thing that like makes you drop a ball behind, and I was
Mhm.
just like kind of, and I didn't realize it left something behind, so I was kind of like standing somewhere like not in range of anybody else, and that was not placing in a good spot. And because I was like fucking that up, I also was like I got hit by way too many of his like left right attacks because I was like, oh, I was monks are fairly agile, and so it's great for like being able to get out of situations, but like when you run out of things to move yourself, you're just kind of like, well, fuck, and I couldn't
Do you use the torpedo or the multiple rolls?
torpedo.
Okay, that's interesting. I was talking with Lindley about it, who's also a monk, and he was like, I moved off the torpedo because I just realized that having more rolls was more important to me than having like the big long
Yeah,
torpedo and then the move speed after the torpedo sort of thing.
yeah, torpedo is also dangerous because like you can overroll and like put yourself somewhere you're not supposed to be. um Part of it for me though is that like I don't, so because he's Kyrian, I can use the shapeshift on Ardenweald to or Night Fae to it's like another set of rolls essentially, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah, definitely.
that's a lot of flexibility there.
Yeah,
All
that's really cool. I like that Muazala fight a lot because it is one of those like basic to advanced fights in a certain sort of sense. Like so, we always try and like one phase it, and we've gotten to a point where I can just sort of say like, okay, you're bottom left, you're top right, you're like, and I can assign people portals, and we all know where to go. But in a pug, that can actually be really like weird because like he creates he does shadow reality, the 4 portals spawn, and what you want to do is you want to put one person on each of the portals, and then the tank and the healer on one portal, and then you get all of the totems down in one go, and you all come back to Muzala, and you beat him in, and that's one phasing Muzala, right? Um, but it does require some like real coordination. Like what we do is we take what we assign everybody to a portal. Everybody takes their own portal, and then we lust there so that everybody can get their totem down, and then we come back, but just lust, and then we save all of our cooldowns, and then we come back, and then you get that big haste buff from Bonsamdi,
Mm.
and that's when you just like end the boss with this big haste buff. You're using all of your like personal cooldowns and stuff like that. And I think that stuff is like really neat, right? Like it's kind of like it's kind of like figuring out a raid strat, but we did it
Yeah.
ourselves or
Yeah,
whatever.
no, that's awesome. Um, Something that I will say that I'm very happy about is I decided instead of building the legendary I was supposed to, I upgraded my Touch of Death legendary, and
Nice.
it works really well in Mythic Plus, just because you're constantly like every minute I can like just knock something off, right? Like
I think in Mythic Plus that's got to be the best one. Like, there's no way that Zwin Legendary is as good in Mythic Plus. Because if you think about it, you're adding your health in like 37 times over every minute. You're
yeah,
nuking somebody. That's just like an insane amount of damage. I actually did a Torghast twisting corridors with Lindley where I had a really good build and I was like top DPS, and then he got the touch of death powers and all of a sudden he just like kept shooting up. I was like, there's no way I can compete with this. He's a tank building tank stuff, but now that means his health pool is like 300k and he's just like, nuking these guys like these like trash mobs or whatever. But yeah, it's pretty funny.
yeah, no, it's a fucking fantastic. Uh, Especially like I find that the dungeon bosses tend to be a little bit like they have mechanics that like let you use it more, right? Like in raid there's like less stuff to interact with individually, right? And like
Hmm.
especially like even on like a single target raid thing, right? Like in order to use it effectively, you need to time it so that like because if you do it like you either do a third of your health to an enemy under 15%, or you do your full health if they've got less than you. So like on a bigger enemy, you have to actually time it so that you're hitting it at the right moment to kill them, which is like I think something that gets missed in some of it, but like it's just like not as effective in raid, right? Like it's effective maybe in like we've talked about this in the Sun King one, but
Yeah.
even then, it's still like not like a ton of little things, right? Like it's
Yeah, I have the same sort of interaction. Like my very first legendary was pretty basic. It just adds a mortal strike to my 45-second cooldown Ravager. But in raid, but then I built a second one called Battle Lord, which says Slam, which is my filler attack, has a 40% chance to reset the cooldown of Mortal Strike and make it cost a bunch less rage or whatever. Um, the nice thing about raid was it actually makes Battlelord very good because you're just for you that you are sitting and DPSing the boss, you're going through your full rotation. But if I'm out in the open world, I'm actually not really using slam all that much. And like slam to reset the mortal strike cooldown on just like a random mob is just not even that useful. So I definitely do think that there are like different legendaries that are useful for different kind of tasks.
yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah,
Um,
I'm actually surprised. I'm looking at it's like best Mythic Plus legendaries, and they still say the uh
Invoker's Delight.
Invoker's Delight is the best for all of them, which I'm just like, wow, that is not what I would expect to see.
Yeah, I mean it's supposed to be it's a huge haste buff, and I haven't used it, so maybe maybe it just makes your rotations that much better. But I don't know. Although as chat informs us, your time to execute won't kill you, which is uh,
Yeah, Shadow Priest Shadow Word Death reflex like rebounds the damage back into you if it doesn't kill the target.
uh,
So big yikes. Though I will say I have a lot of experience with killing myself using abilities because I've been doing a lot of Torghast on Gondor, my Demonology Warlock, and one of the epic powers in Torghast says so. The way Demonology works is you're casting Hand of Gul'dan, which is this like meteor, and then depending on the amount of soul shards you have, a bunch of little imps pop out of the meteor and start shooting your guy. So you're like generating, anywhere between like 5 and 20 imps that are just kind of following you around, plinking away at your targets. There's a Torghast power that says Hand of Gul'dan no longer costs soul shards. It costs 10% of your max HP. or your current health actually technically. So you just spam Hand of Gul'dan and you get a million of these little imps or whatever, but you're also like nuking yourself while doing it, which is pretty funny.
Yeah. So the Torghast stories. Have you played the with the Beasts of Torghast stuff that
Yeah.
they do this week?
Hmm.
Um,
I did one solo run this week where I powered up my beast in a very satisfying way, I guess. How are you finding the beasts of prodigum?
so I had a very similar kind of experience because like I picked up the power that like shares healing. I picked up the power that when it dies it falls over, and then I got some health on it. But then I picked up a couple of the ones that are like does more damage but drains health. And
Yeah,
so like
I had that exact same thing, and it became this like walking nuke, basically.
yeah, and well, if you get the split health thing while it's regenerating health, it's healing you with it. It heals you,
Yeah.
which is like great. Like just like walk in, like let the beast do some damage, then it falls over, like nukes everything, and then starts healing you. It's great. It's fantastic. I also
I had a lot of fun with it, though. People are really complaining about it, and I get that, I guess. I don't know. It's like this kind of stuff I have a hard time getting mad about because I feel like if we didn't have these special powers or whatever, Torghast would feel even more like a slog that people are already complaining about. I just feel like, man, sometimes the WoW community just really likes to fucking complain.
yeah. No, I mean part of the issue here is going to be that like I'm already feeling like because I have the execute or I have the fatal touch legendary. I like all like nearly every run I'm on like without even trying to, I'll get to zero CD, fatal touch, which makes it makes the actual floors not what's the word trivial, and the boss is a little bit of, but it's like I'm just walking through like fatal touch, fatal touch, fatal touch, fatal touch, fatal touch, and that's like all I do for the entire fight except for like the elite mobs, but
Yeah, I have a similar experience. There's a warrior power called the Voracious Culling Blade, which like you use execute 30 times and then you can just execute whenever you want. Execute is the hardest hitting ability. And it just becomes you just one button, execute all the time. Don't cast anything else, just cast execute. That's it. And I do like that in certain situations because like sometimes you just want a one button kind of offensive power to take care of my offense. That is just all the damage I need. One Voracious Culling Blade and like a couple of ones that increase your rage generation will basically get you there, which is neat because it also means that like you can kind of like pick up some of the other powers to sort of like fill out your tough, like make you tougher or add kind of like group utility or something kind of along those lines. But there's a lot of times where I see Voracious Culling Blade and I choose the other power because it's boring.
mm, yeah, no, it's it's weird because like I don't know, I have never like I ran a group one with you once, but like I maybe it's just the nature of monk, but like I have feel no need to do grouped thing. Like maybe for like endless like the last what was it called
Twisting Corridors, yeah.
twisting
I
corridors.
highly recommend doing Twisting Corridors in a group because people are expressing a lot of pain because the final bosses are tough or whatever. But I think honestly, Twisting Corridors is just built for you to have a tank in your party.
Hmm.
Like we did Twisting Corridors with people who were like, basically failing out of 18 floor runs because they get to the final boss and they just can't kill it, which sucks. That's terrible, right? But I just went into tank spec and I was building all of the health powers, all of the DR powers or whatever, and we got to that final boss and basically just having a tank there to keep its attention lets everybody just like we call it ore ore ore, like
Yeah.
the anime like ore 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 on
Yeah.
the boss and it dies. So
Yeah. No, I
I
mean,
actually also just really like doing twisting corridors in a group. It is just funner, in my opinion,
I I I,
to do tour guests in a group.
I definitely would buy that for twisting corridors because like I did the first twisting corridors floor because there's like a quest for it. I did it
Mhm.
like I did it all by my like I managed to get it my first time, and like before I hit the sixth floor I had the touch of death build, and it's just kind of like thing, and then like it was like boring and then like stressful because things started to outscale my health as you went up the floors, and then boring again because like I picked like at one point I had like a ton of health and like the power that procs touch of death to like five other things. So like just like mass clearing things like what bonk 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 bonk. And then the final boss was like really stressful because it was like, what did I do? So this is for all you monks out there. This is some monk tech. There is a common power called like ever tumbling stone, and it's 30 seconds after you pick up the power or after you enter a floor. Every yard you roll gives you a second of immunity. So if there's one at the vendor before the boss, you like right before you go, you pick it up and you just roll straight to the boss, and you're like immune to all damage for 45 seconds. You just try and kill it within that 45 seconds, because otherwise, it's like I'm either gonna get this now, or I'm not gonna get it. I'm not gonna get out of this floor. So it's just like like slamming my fingers on the keyboard, but yeah, it worked out. Oh, that's the other thing too, is I discovered like even if you can't out health the boss, you can like once it's below 50%, you can just spam Touch of Death over and over again, and just like it's
I guess that is nice. Yeah, I actually basically anything that doesn't help me on the boss, I almost always don't take that power anymore.
yeah,
I never take Maw Rat powers unless like I absolutely have to. I
right,
would rather take like I don't know, what's the worst power you can possibly think of? I would rather take that than like the exploding Maw Rat power, because I think about inflection point. The inflection point of am I going to complete this run or not is almost always the final boss, right?
right.
I mean, I've definitely had tough times. I've definitely wiped inside of, high level, high layer, floors where I'm like taking on too many elites or something, or we don't pull something right, or a crucial spell doesn't get interrupted. But like very rarely do my number of deaths actually outpace my ability to just like generically clear through like the floor itself. So in just sort of a water finds a crack way, I basically never take powers that don't add throughput on the boss.
Yeah, no, I definitely get that. It's just because Touch of Death is so like I have had times where I've had a couple, like actually both runs that I've done since I like focused on it. All no three. It's been 3 or 4 at this point, where like I will get like out of like a drop like one option, and it's the
Hmm.
Touch of Death cooldown, and if I get two of those, I have no cooldown on Touch of Death. So it's like even and in two of them, I have gotten a third one which does nothing. But it's like, well, what am I gonna do? I can't not take it. So
Yeah, I feel like certain classes have like interesting powers and certain classes have like not great powers. Um, we talked about this a little bit. Like Rogue, the most impactful power in Rogue is a common power that says like when you use a finishing move, your next combo point generator deals more damage, which just like that power alone increases so much damage. Or even just like the Hellfire Pact, which says your summoned demons as a warlock, your summoned demons do 50% more damage. When most of my damage comes from little imps that are plinking away with their like 100 damage bolts, getting those to be 150 damage bolts is huge, right? And it does feel a little weird to be like picking up this common ability and having that be like the lion's share of your DPS contribution. I actually have realized that part of this is spec stuff, right? Which I think is tough for the Torghast designers to sort of walk, because you can change your spec inside of Torghast at the specific like levels or whatever. So they actually have to make every single power useful no matter what spec you're in, right? It'll just change what the active abilities are. But I was mistakenly under the impression that you could do uh like you could find like spec specific powers that would only interact with like arms warrior, for instance, but that is just not the case. Which that's tough.
yeah, yeah. Although, how does that work with the ones that give you talents?
I think there's just a generic talent on each of the trees that it goes to. So if you look at a talent tree, it's always the left.
Right. Yeah.
The left side of the tree is always passive. The right side of the tree is always active. So it always just gives you what is on the left side of that tree, as far as I know. There might be ones where it'll give you a passive in the middle row, because sometimes the middle is active, sometimes it's passive. But um,
Right. But if you picked a talent, like if you got one of those and it was one you already had, and you picked another one and then you switch specs, does it like hold it over, or does it?
probably not. I'm
Yeah.
sure it just finds like a different talent.
Yeah, or the same one, the one in the same position or something. But
Yeah. I bet that's what it is. The one in the same position.
yeah,
I've never done it, but
yeah.
hey.
No, because like if you have the talent that it's going to give you, it lets you. pick it. It lets you pick one for free, right? Like one in the same round.
Yeah.
So yeah, yeah. Well, what else? What else has happened this week? I played some Modern War, or not Modern Warfare, Black Ops Cold War. It is being slightly
I
more
heard they
stable for me.
released zombies and it's fun.
Yeah, I haven't played zombies. Never.
That's it.
I'm.
I saw a tweet. It said they released zombies and also zombies is fun.
It's free this week. Is what it is. I think it's released with the game. I don't think it's like the actual mode's been around for a while, but it's a free week for it. Um,
Oh, that would actually make sense. I don't even see it on I have like my like launcher thing curated so that it's only games that I care about and I don't have any of these Call of Duty.
yeah. And otherwise, this week I watched a lot of YouTube cooking channels, which is what I do every week. So
I have watched a lot of Action Button. I got very
Oh,
hooked on Action Button
I'm
after watching
glad.
the Tokimeki Memorial, and I've now watched all of it, and I am back to watching Tokimeki Memorial
So
because it's just satisfying.
he's got some older stuff from he was at
Kotaku, right?
Kotaku. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I would look up his Dragon what's the famous one that everybody
Quest?
yeah, Dragon Quest 11 review. I thought was very good. Um I actually still I need to go watch the Final Fantasy 7 remake. It's the only one of his that I haven't seen, but I think at least from what I've seen of him in the Action Button era, I thought he like really hit his stride with Doom. Like I thought Last of Us 2 wasn't as good as Doom was, but Doom Forward has been phenomenal. Pac-Man, Tokimeki Memorial, and apparently Cyberpunk, or I think Cyberpunk's the next one. But
Is it? No way. Well, he
yep,
said he was like building to Cyberpunk.
yeah,
I imagine there was gonna be like one more in between.
yeah. So if you are, this is shout out to Tim Rogers. If you're his patron, you know how in the middle of Tokimeki Memorial, he's like, I was gonna put like a 20-minute intermission here to convince you to leave. He
Yeah.
released that on his Patreon. Um, um, and it's entertaining, especially divorce. I might have been annoyed if in the middle of the 6 hour thing that I was trying to watch 6 hours, if it had been there, but it's standing alone. It's a fun thing to
The
watch.
funny thing is that I actually, to be honest with you, from being real, I don't think he is as insightful as other people. Like, so for instance, um, I talk about this guy all the time, Aaron Signal, like Campster. He has a review of Doom, and the way that he talks about Doom in 20 minutes, I think, is maybe more really insightful to Doom than the 3 hour Tim Rogers review. But just like on a purely sort of like aesthetic level of just the stories are funny and like the way that he writes is funny and captivating and engaging. I just kind of like ride the wave, and it's like I don't know. It's very easy to, I guess, to just like vibe to,
Yeah,
compared to some of like the really like hard, deep criticism out there. It was specific with the Doom one, right? Because I've played Doom, but like I know Doom almost universally through critic YouTube videos about Doom,
right.
right? And so seeing his sort of quote unquote take on it, I was actually kind of surprised at how little. Like I kind of just felt like he sort of basically scratched the surface on it, right? And offered sort of
Yeah, it was much.
platitudes.
I was gonna say it was much more about like the culture surrounding Doom than it was about Doom. And I think this is very
Yeah,
per
yeah,
view,
exactly.
right?
And
Like,
that's exactly what I'm saying. That stuff I think is great and really like fun to watch, but in the context of like a video game review, it's really not that.
yeah, I,
Uh,
I thought like the Tokameki Memorial stuff like got a lot deeper in there, right? Like about kind of like the nature of like what, like the kind of like realization that what you were like the part about you are authoring a story and you have to write it correctly in order for the game to complete correctly, right? Like I thought
yeah,
that
I
was
I
pretty.
agree with that 100%. Like to be honest, the thing with Doom I think that kind of like maybe I'm complaining about here is there's that point where he talks about like Doom has WADs, right? Therefore, all games kind of Doom begat all games, and to play all of Doom is to play all of games since then, which I just think is just like that's that's like beginning an essay the Webster's dictionary defines like, come on, yeah,
Yeah,
sure.
yeah.
People learn from big important games, Tim Rogers, right? Obviously,
Well, it's
But
funny
yes, I
because
agree with
like
you.
the arc of like that theme is like Pac-Man, which is Pac-Man has come a long way since itself, right? Like, which
Yeah,
is
and
like
I
that.
actually think that it worked so much better in Pac-Man because he shows you Pac-Man and then all of these variants of it, and it demonstrates in really clear, straightforward terms, actually, I think, why the original Pac-Man is the best incarnation of it. And like, even though, there's new variations on like the theme or whatever, and those can be individually good, they never quite get to that sort of like perfection. But I don't know. It's just such a cop out to say like, oh yeah, to play all of Doom is to play fucking every Call of Duty. Like, shut the fuck up. That's bullshit. Get out of here with this shit. Like, but
Mm.
like, but the story that he tells about his just like hateful, angry friend who like really loves the violence. Like, first of all, nobody ever admits to this, but like, I was like personally affected by that because I also have very vivid memories of like playing video games with like friends of mine who got really weirdly into the violence. And like that stuff is like also very evocative, even if it is just, its relationship to Doom is pretty tangential.
Right. Yeah. 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 I mean,
Or like
it's
the conversation in college. How many conversations in college did I have with people that looked exactly like his conversation with that guy? 15 years. I don't know. How old is he? 10
uh,
years? 10
uh,
years before I ever, like went to
yeah,
college or whatever about video games. I mean, for us it was like Dota maybe? I don't know. What's a good what's
Mass Effect.
Mass Effect maybe? Yeah, exactly. I don't know. Maybe Call of Duty by then cuz Call of Duty Modern Warfare came out
Yeah.
before
No.
we were
Yeah.
in
That's
college.
that's then. Yeah. So like the kind of scene where it's like everybody's sitting around watching people play like that happened. This was I think before we hung out a lot, but
Mhm.
that
Mhm.
happened in my dorm room sophomore year, right? Like
Yep.
I brought an Xbox and we played like either Modern Warfare or Street Fighter, and we'd all just sit around talking like on a Friday night or something. Occasionally Smash, right? Like um it that was kind of like the oeuvre, right? Like
Yeah.
um and Doom is kind of like iconic of like that generation. It's interesting to think about because like Call of Duty is kind of that for the current age. That and like I guess like maybe like the sports games, right? Like FIFA or Madden. But like
Mhm.
gaming has spread out so far. Like Doom kind of was that in a lot of ways because there wasn't a lot else to ping at that point in time, right? Like he's I think just over 40.
Yeah.
So
I also think that I think of games in terms of lineages sometimes. And like the lineage of Doom, I think of myself in a certain sense as like a child of Doom, even though I never played first person shooters, because the lineage of Doom, I actually think there's an offshoot of Doom, which is sort of like Quake 2 lobbies and servers and that kind of
right.
thing. And then that's where StarCraft comes out of. And I think of that branch as like hugely important to my charted path of like video game history, if that makes sense. Um, because like like I remember when I was in like middle school, I used to go to my dad's office and at 5 my dad would be like working or something like that, and all of the tech guys would go to computers on the network and they would load up Quake, and we would have these giant Quake matches in like the and I don't know why they were playing with me. These guys were all like, in their 20s, like IT people or, whatever, associates and shit. And they let like me, like a 12-year-old play Quake with them. But I vividly remember, right, like how much fun that was to get everybody in like the big LAN, just like killing these shit out of each other. And so uh with mods too. I vividly remember mods because one of the guys was Optimus Prime, and he had voice lines, which is weird. Like the Optimus Prime voice lines were playing, and I was like, "This is magic." But
Yeah.
but yeah, so like I think that I don't know. I don't what are we talking about? Tim Rogers is great, I
Yeah.
guess, is my final point. I also think the Tokimeki Memorial is so much better because he narrates the playthroughs. That part is golden. I just die laughing. He's like, she called me Bubba's. And I'm just like,
You know,
it's
his
good
kid
stuff.
his cadence is magical. Uh
Yeah.
All right. Well, we've gone over time.
Yeah.
If you'd like to email
Shit, I
us,
didn't even talk about being a hardcore WoW capitalist.
all right, we were going to talk about that. Maybe next time we'll talk about in-game markets. Um, if you'd like to email us about what you think of World of Warcraft or Tavern Keeper or any of the other things we talked about on this podcast, you can email us at podcast@playgames.com or subversiveplaygames@gmail.com. Rate and review us on iTunes or wherever you can find us, which is nearly everywhere. Um, that's everything I had. But do you have anything else you want to promote?
I do have one thing I'm to promote. One, Buddy Gets Good is returning this week. I don't remember what I'm playing, but I'm streaming this
Is
week.
it
So
Tavern
the
Keeper?
it is not Tavern Keeper. I am playing Tavern Keeper, but that's probably going to be so. I'm going to play Tavern Keeper when all of the games have been released. So the first week in February, February 5th, I'll be playing Tavern Keeper on stream, and also the other two games because we're going to do all of them. I'm gonna do all of them in one stream. But this week, I'm playing something else. I think it's Rain World actually. Um,
What's Rain World? I don't
and
think I've heard of it.
Rain World, it's not a game that we published, but it's a game that we ported. But
Okay.
I'm good friends with a guy who does Rain World stuff, and I wanted to give him a little shout out. Riv, if you're watching, it's for you. And then also pay attention to, I guess, the Aquapar Twitter for on Thursday, and also our YouTube page because we're gonna set another video live for the next two videos. Those are both coming, or the next two games. Those are both coming out on Thursday. So this Thursday, then next Thursday, and of course. Um, the Tavern Keeper is live right now, so you can go play that at Itch or Game Jolt.
Will the future games also come with contests, or is it one for each or something? Or
I honestly did the contest thing at like the last fucking second, and I put it in the email. But then I was like, well, I put it in the email, so I have to do it everywhere. So I don't know off the top of my head. The Tavern Keeper lends itself towards contested because it's timed and it's high scored.
right?
The other games I don't believe have that same sort of functionality, but who knows? Maybe they will.
Well,
Uh,
pay attention to the Aquapar Games Twitter then, I guess.
Yeah, pay attention to the Aqua Power Games Twitter for
And
sure.
with that, I'll say until next time, dear listeners.
Until next time, loyal listeners.
You.